Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. I'm Alex Carter.
And I'm Olivia Reyes.
Looks like we're taking another audience request for this deep dive. And this was pretty wild.
Yeah, this one's really captured the imagination. Driverless cars, self-driving trucks. It seems like everyone's talking about it these days.
Yeah, it's definitely got that futuristic sci-fi vibe, but it also feels like it's right around the corner, you know?
Absolutely. And we've got this incredible report that dives deep into the whole world of autonomous vehicles, or AVs, we'll just call it the report for simplicity.
Perfect. So the report, so let's start with the basics.
Right.
What are we even talking about when we say autonomous vehicles? I mean, are we talking about cars that can literally drive themselves?
Well, it's funny you should say that because the idea of a car driving itself is actually a lot more complex than it sounds.
Right.
We're really talking about a whole system of technologies working together.
Okay, so it's not just about like slapping some cameras and GPS on a car and letting it loose on the streets.
No, not at all. It's way more sophisticated than that. We're talking about artificial intelligence sensors that can perceive the environment around the car and algorithms that help the car process all that information and make decisions in real time.
So there's a lot of brain power, or should I say silicon power, going on under the hood of these vehicles.
Exactly. AI is playing a huge role in making autonomous vehicles a reality.
So this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
The report traces the whole concept of AVs all the way back to the 1980s. I mean, who knew?
Yeah, it's pretty surprising, right? It turns out a lot of the early research into driverless technology was funded by DARPA,
Yeah.
the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency.
Oh, right, the folks who brought us the internet.
Exactly. And their early experiments in the 80s focused on things like sensor technology, basic navigation systems, the ability for a vehicle to kind of see and understand its surroundings.
So were these early AVs even able to, like, drive around a parking lot without crashing?
Well, they were definitely more proof of concept than ready for the open road. But things really start to take off in the early 2000s with DARPA's Grand Challenges.
The grand challenges, what were those?
Essentially, they were these obstacle courses for driverless vehicles designed to push the limits of what was possible.
Oh, wow. So like robot Olympics for cars.
Exactly. And they really helped to accelerate the development of autonomous technology. The 2005 Grand Challenge was a major turning point. Several teams managed to complete a 132-mile course in the Mojave Desert.
Wow, that's incredible. So these grand challenges proved that AVs could handle some pretty challenging terrain. But when did this whole thing start to move from research labs into the real world?
Well, that's where Google comes in. In 2009, they launched their self-driving car project, which later became Waymo.
Ah, Waymo. I've heard of them. They're like the big players in the AV world now, right?
They're definitely one of the leaders. And their entry into the game really signaled that driverless tech wasn't just a research project anymore. It had serious commercial potential.
Right. So Google's involvement kind of brought legitimacy and investment to the field. Okay, but when did this whole thing start to feel real? Like, not just something out of a sci-fi movie, but something you might actually encounter on the road?
I'd say around 2014 when Tesla launched its autopilot system, that's when things started to shift.
Oh yeah, autopilot. That's when I first started paying attention to this whole AV thing. Suddenly these features like lane keeping and adaptive cruise control were available in everyday cars.
Exactly. Tesla's autopilot really made driverless technology feel accessible to the average consumer. It kind of normalized the idea of cars doing some of the driving for you.
It was like a taste of the future. But it wasn't all smooth sailing, was it? The report mentioned some accidents, some pretty serious ones.
Unfortunately, yes. Between 2016 and 2021, there were a number of high-profile accidents involving AVs, which raised some serious questions about safety.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we were talking about machines making decisions that could have life or death consequences. So how do we even define autonomous when it comes to vehicles? I mean, are all driverless cars created equal?
That's a great question, and the answer is no, they're not all created equal. The industry uses a 5-level classification system to describe the different levels of autonomy.
5 levels. Okay, break it down for us, Olivia.
Sure. So imagine a ladder with 5 rungs, each rung representing a higher level of autonomy. Level 1 at the bottom is basically just driver assistance features like cruise control or lane departure warnings. These systems are designed to help the driver, but they don't actually drive the car.
Got it. So level 1 is like having a really helpful co-pilot.
Exactly. Now let's move up to level 2. This is where a lot of vehicles are at today. This level includes features like adaptive cruise control, which can maintain a set distance from the car in front of you, and lane keeping assist, which helps keep your car centered in its lane.
So at level 2, the car is starting to take on some of the driving tasks, but the human is still very much in control.
Exactly. The driver needs to be paying attention and ready to take over at any moment. Now, level 3 is where things start to get really interesting.
Okay, level 3, hit me with it.
At level 3, the vehicle can actually handle certain driving situations completely on its own, but only under specific conditions and in limited environments.
So, for example, the car could drive itself on the highway, but you'd still need to be ready to take over if the weather got bad or if something unexpected happened.
Exactly. And that's a key distinction with level 3. The car can do some things, but the human driver is still ultimately responsible.
Okay, so level 3 is like having a co-pilot who can handle some parts of the trip, but you're still the captain.
Perfect analogy.
Okay,
Now let's jump up to level 4. This is where we start to see true driverless capabilities.
okay, level 4 things are getting futuristic.
At level 4, the vehicle can drive itself completely in certain areas or under certain conditions, and the human driver doesn't need to intervene or even be present.
Wait, so at level 4, I could theoretically take a nap in the back seat while my car drives me home?
In theory, yes.
Mhm.
But there's a catch. Level 4, autonomy is still geographically limited. It might work great in a well-mapped city with good weather, but it might not be able to handle a snowstorm in a rural area.
Gotcha. So it's like having a chauffeur who knows certain routes really well, but you wouldn't necessarily trust them to drive you anywhere, anytime.
Precisely. And that brings us to the final rung of our ladder, level 5.
Level 5. The holy grail of autonomous driving. This is what we've all been waiting for, right? Fully autonomous vehicles that can drive anywhere, anytime, in any conditions.
That's the dream. Level 5 autonomy would mean a vehicle that can handle all driving tasks in all situations, essentially replicating and maybe even surpassing human driving capabilities.
So we're talking about a car that could literally drive itself from New York to LA rain, or shine through crowded cities and deserted highways without any human input whatsoever.
Exactly. That's the ultimate vision. But it's important to note that level 5 autonomy is still largely theoretical. We're not there yet.
Okay, so where are we now on this autonomy ladder? Were we all cruising around in level 5 luxury?
Not quite. Most of the vehicles on the road today are somewhere between level 2 and level 3, with some companies like Waymid pushing towards level 4 in certain areas.
So we're still in the early stages of this autonomous revolution. We've come a long way since those early DARPA prototypes, but we're not quite living in a Jetsons episode where our cars fly and drive themselves.
Exactly. We've made incredible progress, but there are still some hurdles to overcome.
So what are those hurdles? What's holding us back from a world where our cars do all the driving? What are the roadblocks on the path to level 5?
Well, for one, the technology itself isn't perfect yet. Think about driving in a snowstorm or navigating a construction zone with unexpected detours. Those are the kinds of situations that can still trick up AVs.
Yeah, human drivers have trouble with those sometimes too.
Absolutely. And while AVs are getting better at handling complex scenarios, they're not quite as adaptable or intuitive as human drivers yet.
So it's not just about following the rules of the road, it's about being able to think on your feet and react to the unexpected.
Exactly. And that's where AI and machine learning come in. AVs need to be able to learn from their experiences, adapt to new environments, and make decisions based on incomplete information, just like human drivers do every day.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So the tech itself still has some evolving to do. What are the other challenges? I know there's been a lot of talk about the legal side of things.
You're absolutely right. The legal and regulatory landscape for AVs is still very much a work in progress. The rules and regulations vary widely from state to state, and there's no clear federal framework in the U.S. yet.
So it's kind of like the Wild West of autonomous driving out there.
In a way, yes. And that lack of consistency makes it difficult for companies to test and deploy their technology on a large scale. They're essentially navigating a patchwork of regulations which can slow down progress.
Yeah, that sounds like a major headache. So we've got the tech challenges, the legal hurdles. What else is standing in the way of level 5? What about the human factor, public perception and acceptance?
That's a huge piece of the puzzle. Public perception is critical. People need to feel comfortable and safe sharing the road with driverless vehicles.
Right. It's one thing to read about AVs in a magazine. It's another thing entirely to be driving next to a car with no one behind the wheel.
Absolutely. There's a natural human tendency to be wary of new technologies, especially when those technologies have the potential to change our lives so drastically.
So building trust and addressing public concerns is going to be key to the widespread adoption of AVs.
It absolutely is. It's not just about the technology itself. It's about how we integrate that technology into our society, our infrastructure, our lives.
Well said, Olivia. This has been a really fascinating conversation.
Yeah.
And we've only just scratched the surface of this topic.
There's so much more to explore.
We'll dive deeper into the world of autonomous vehicles right after this. Welcome back to the deep dive. We're talking all things autonomous vehicles. And before we went to
Yeah, we were talking about some of the challenges facing this whole idea of widespread AVs, you know?
right, and I think one thing that really stood out to me was just the human element of it all.
Yeah,
People needing to trust these systems, not just in terms of safety, but also in how they fit into our lives.
absolutely. That trust is going to be built over time, through experience, seeing these vehicles out on the road, seeing how they work.
And seeing how they can actually benefit us.
Yeah.
Right. Because honestly, when I think about driverless cars, the first thing that comes to mind is convenience, like being able to kick back, relax, let the car do the work.
Oh, yeah. Convenience is a huge factor for sure. I mean, imagine never having to circle the block for parking again or, using your commute to catch up on work or just chill out.
Right. But it's got to be more than just convenience, right? What other benefits are we talking about here?
Well, think about safety for a second. Human error is a factor in the vast majority of car accidents, but AVs, they don't get tired. They don't get distracted. They're constantly monitoring the road, reacting to potential hazards.
So potentially safer roads, less traffic congestion, more productive commutes. That all sounds pretty good. But what about the potential downsides? I've heard some people express concern about job displacement, especially for folks in transportation-related fields like truck drivers.
Yeah, that's a valid concern for sure. I mean, the adoption of AVs could definitely disrupt those industries, trucking, taxi services, deliveries. It's something we need to acknowledge and start thinking about how to mitigate those impacts.
Like retraining programs for workers who might be displaced.
Exactly. We need to help people adapt to this changing landscape.
Yeah.
And it's not just about retraining, it's about creating new opportunities in fields related to AV technology, software development, maintenance, data analysis, all that.
So it's about a shift in the job market rather than just jobs disappearing.
Yeah, exactly. It's about adapting and evolving along with the technology.
Okay, so you've got the benefits, we've got the challenges. What about where we're at right now with AV
Yeah.
development? What's the current state of things in the real world?
Well, as we were talking about earlier, most of the AVs we see today are somewhere between level 2 and level 3 autonomy, so
Yeah.
still relying on human oversight. But there are some areas where we're starting to see level 4.
Like Waymo's driverless taxi service over in Phoenix.
Exactly. Waymo's definitely leading the way. Their driverless taxis have been operating in Phoenix for a while now, and they're starting to expand into other cities.
That's pretty impressive. Driverless taxis are actually a thing now, at least in some places. What about other companies like Tesla and Uber? What are they up to?
Well, Tesla's an interesting one. They've been super vocal about their goal of achieving full self-driving capabilities.
Right, they even have that full self-driving system, don't they?
Yeah, but it's important to remember that it's still considered level 2 technology despite the name.
So it's not actually fully self-driving yet.
Not yet. It's still a driver assistance system. The
Hmm.
driver needs to stay alert and be ready to take control if needed.
It just goes to show how important public perception and education are. People need to understand the limitations of these systems and use them responsibly.
Absolutely. And then you've got Uber. They're also heavily invested in AV development. They see driverless tech as a key part of their ride-hailing business model in the future.
Yeah, if they can cut out the cost of human drivers, it could have a huge impact on their bottom line. Makes sense. What about the traditional car companies, though, like Ford and GM? Are they doing anything in the AV space?
Oh, they're definitely in the game. Companies like Ford, GM, Toyota, Volkswagen, they're all investing heavily in AV tech, both developing it themselves and partnering with tech companies.
It seems like everyone's starting to realize that the future of transportation is heading towards autonomy.
Yeah, it really does. And it's not just cars and trucks either. We're seeing autonomous tech being developed for all sorts of vehicles, buses, delivery vans, even ships and aircraft.
So this is a much bigger revolution than just replacing our cars with robots.
For sure. We're talking about a fundamental shift in how we think about transportation logistics, the design of our cities.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it that way. We
Yeah.
aren't just talking about a new car, we're talking about a whole new way of life.
And that's what makes it so fascinating to explore. It's about so much more than just the technology. It's about how we adapt, how we solve problems, how we shape the future.
Well said, Olivia. This has been a really insightful conversation.
Yeah.
And we've covered a lot of ground. The history of AVs, the current techs, the potential benefits and challenges.
And we've really only scratched the surface. There's still so much more to dive into, like the ethical questions around autonomous decision-making and the global race to be the leader in this industry.
And speaking of the global landscape, That's something we definitely need to talk about because it's not just the Silicon Valley thing anymore. This is a global phenomenon with implications for everyone.
Absolutely. The development and adoption of AV technology is happening all over the world, and each country is taking its own approach. Different strategies, different regulations.
So it's not just a race to the finish line. It's about how we get there and what kind of world we create along the way.
Exactly. And that's why these conversations are so important. We need to be talking about these issues, exploring the questions shaping the future of AVs in a way that benefits everyone.
Couldn't agree more, Olivia. This has been a great journey so far. But before we jump into the global scene of AV development, let's take a minute to recap what we've learned.
Sounds good. It's always helpful to pause and reflect, you know?
Okay, so starting from the beginning, we talked about what autonomous vehicles actually are and how they rely on this complex combination of AI sensors and algorithms to navigate.
Right. And we went through the history of the technology from those early research projects funded by DARPA to the rise of companies like Waymo and Tesla.
We talked about the 5 levels of autonomy from those basic driver assistance features all the way up to level 5, which is that full-blown human-like driving capability in any environment.
And of course, we explored some of the big challenges facing widespread adoption of AVs, like the need for even more advanced technology, the complexity of regulations, and the whole issue of building public trust.
And we didn't forget about the potential benefits either, like increased safety, reduced traffic, and greater accessibility for people who can't drive themselves.
We also talked about the potential downsides, like jobs being displaced and the need to be proactive in addressing those concerns through things like retraining and creating new opportunities.
It's been a pretty comprehensive look so far, and I'm excited to continue this journey as we dive into how the rest of the world is approaching this whole autonomous vehicle thing.
Me too. Let's see what's happening on the global stage.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been talking all about the world of autonomous vehicles. And before
we jump to that recap, we were just about to go global.
Right, because like we were saying, this isn't just a Silicon Valley story anymore. This is happening all over the world.
It really is. It's a global phenomenon, you know, different countries, different strategies, different implications for everyone.
So, Olivia, where's all the action happening right now? Is it still mainly a U.S. thing, or are other countries kind of stepping up?
While the U.S. has been a leader for sure with companies like Waymo and Tesla and Cruise, it's not the only game in town anymore. Europe and China, they've really emerged as major players, each with their own unique approach.
So it's like a 3-way race to see who can get to full autonomy first.
You could see it that way, but it's not just about speed, it's about strategy and vision, too. The U.S., with its more flexible regulations, has fostered a lot of innovation and experimentation.
But like we talked about earlier, that lack of a clear federal framework can also cause some problems, right? Different regulations in different states.
Yeah.
It makes it hard for companies to operate across the whole country.
Exactly. Now look at Europe. They're known for their stricter data privacy laws and safety regulations.
They're more cautious.
Yeah. And those regulations impact how AVs are tested and deployed, so it's a slower, more step-by-step approach.
Does that mean European companies are falling behind?
Not necessarily. Companies like BMW, Audi, Mercedes, Volvo, they're all investing heavily in AV tech, but with a strong focus on safety and reliability and ethical considerations. They're prioritizing a gradual rollout, building trust, making sure these systems are really ready for the real world.
So it's about finding that balance between pushing the boundaries and being responsible.
Exactly. Now, China's a really interesting case. They're taking a very centralized, government-led approach.
So the government's really pushing for AV development.
Oh, yeah. They've identified autonomous driving as a strategic industry, and they're investing a ton in infrastructure research partnerships to help it grow quickly.
It's like they're putting their foot on the gas pedal to speed up the whole AV revolution.
Yeah, and they have some big advantages, like a huge amount of driving data from their population in those dense urban areas. All that data is crucial for training the AI that powers these systems.
It's like we always say, data is the new oil.
It really is, and China has a lot of it. Plus, their regulatory process is more streamlined, so they can test and deploy new technologies faster.
So it seems like China's in it for the long haul. They want to be the global leader in AV technology.
They definitely have big ambitions, and they're making progress, but it's hard to say who will win in the end. It's such a complex and constantly changing landscape.
It's more about collaboration and competition, pushing each other to innovate and get better.
Exactly. And in the end, the real winners will be the people who benefit from safer, more efficient, more accessible transportation.
Well said, Olivia. This has been an incredible deep dive into the world of autonomous vehicles.
It really has. We've covered a lot.
We started with the basics of what AVs are, how they work, the technology behind them. And then we dove into the history of the different levels of autonomy, the challenges and benefits.
He talked about the ethical questions, the economic impacts, the global race for leadership. It's been fascinating.
And it's just the beginning. This is a story that's still unfolding and will continue to for years to come.
Absolutely. And we'll be here to keep exploring it with you.
That's right. So until next time, keep those questions coming and keep diving deep into those mysteries of the unknown.
This is Olivia Reyes signing off from The Deep Dive.
And I'm Alex Carter. Thanks for listening, everyone.